Hey everyone, welcome to today's webcast, Habits of Managed Service Business Masters. This week we're focusing on customer-centric compensation. I'm Nick Cavalancia from Tech Evangelism. I'll be your host, and I'll be talking to you a little bit about this week, today that is. And I think where a place I'm going to start is the fact that you guys all need to compensate your own employees in a way that it keeps them, let's say, motivated, focused, and of course happy, right? That's what you want happy employees. But compensation is also kind of a key lever, if you think about it, that ensures their employees act in a certain way that hopefully benefits the business. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. Too much compensation one way or too little of any part of the compensation package, and you might be actually causing some of your own personnel problems and actually some of your own business problems. And if you're not sure what I mean, just kind of hang tight. We're going to get into this a little bit in the next couple of slides here today. And the question kind of becomes for most of you, how do the managed service business masters, how do they set up and derive an appropriate compensation model for their employees, one that actually drives the business forward? And so in this fifth webinar in a six-part series we've been doing over about a 6-week period, this is the fifth week, next week will be the sixth week, on the habits of managed service business masters. I'm going to talk this week about the need for customer-centric compensation, what it should look like, and how it can impact not only your employees, but also the very success of your business. That's kind of the goal this week. Now, before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping tips real quick. We're trying to do this in about 30 minutes or so. So make sure that, we're trying to take too much of your time, but make sure as we're going through this, if you've got any questions, you can see that questions are welcome at any time. I've got the Q&A box up here open in front of me. By all means, feel free to ask those questions and put those into the Q&A box, and I'll try to make sure I get to those as much as I can. We're going to try not to go over the 30 minutes, but we'll see what happens here. Sometimes some of the questions get really good. Some of the discussion gets in there really great with the audience, and so we go over a little bit, but again, try not to. And this webinar is being recorded, and of course the slides and the webinar will be sent back to you guys via email after the webinar is done. So let's kind of jump in first and talk about compensation and as it pertains to your legacy. Now you might say, Nick, why are we talking about my legacy? What's that got to do with anything? I want to talk about compensation. Am I supposed to pay them more, pay them less? Do I raise the percentage of commission? What do I do here? Well, we start with the legacy because compensation is just about how you're going to actually pay people. Compensation drives behavior. And I want you to just hold on to that piece of truth. Compensation drives behavior. You think about it this way. If you pay your salespeople, just focus on them for a second. If you pay your salespeople more to add a new customer, let's say based on the commission percentage or something, than you do to have them expand or extend the reach of your business with a current customer, what are they going to run home to every time? Well, if I make more money adding a new customer, I'm going to try and add more customers because I want to make more money. And so compensation derives behavior. And here's the challenge for some of you. You might be a one-person shop. I owned 2 different IT consulting companies in my 20-something years of experience in IT. One was, in essence, an MSP focused on very small customers, 50 seats and under, and the other one was a high-end consulting, an architecture kind of a IT firm where we focused on doing Active Directory and Exchange designs for very big companies. And so when it was just me by myself doing the IT work or doing the consulting work before I started growing, it was very easy. And in fact, you compensated based on the way that you just ran your business. I focus my business always, no matter what I'm doing. Today, I do a lot more talking to IT organizations, within big companies and the companies like you guys, MSPs as well. And I always focus my energies on investing in my customers, and I make that very clear to my customers. And so that becomes kind of my legacy. But as I grow and I go from a company of 1 to many, many people, that's where you have to actually think about the legacy that you want to leave behind and how does that translate into compensation. And so what you're really trying to do is you should be thinking about your compensation. This kind of seems strange because you probably came into this thinking that you're going to be having a conversation around, what percentage should you be giving your salespeople and how do you make sure that your techs are staying on target or whatever it is. Instead here, you really should be thinking first about the company culture that you want to drive and then figuring out a compensation plan that aligns to that culture, which then aligns to the legacy you want to leave behind. If it's the customer's always, number one or whatever the case is, you know, that's where you need to be working backwards from that legacy, back to the culture, back to the compensation. So that's kind of what I want you guys to be thinking about. And by the way, as we're doing this, I mentioned the Q&A box. If you've got comments, if you've got anecdotes, anything else you want to share as well, put those in the speaker notes. I want to try and make this as interactive a conversation as is possible. So feel free to do that with me today. Now, so what ends up happening is, as you're thinking about your legacy, what you're end up doing here is figuring out a mix of two things. The first one is that actual compensation. What is it I'm actually going to pay? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And I want you guys to ask some questions if you need to, because I'm going to try and cover this at somewhat of a high level, more so than telling you you need to pay your reps exactly this much. That doesn't make any sense. I don't know the specifics of what services you're trying to provide, what the margins are, those kinds of things, how productive your business is. And so what I'm really trying to do is get you to focus for the next 30 minutes on the problem, talk about it at a high level, strategic level, and get you to think about what's the right way to approach the problem so that you can solve it for yourself. That's what I'm trying to do, but at the same time, if you got questions and specifics, let's talk about it. That's what we're here for. But you got to figure out the mix of compensation. And then the other part of this is figuring out the metrics that you're going to put in place. So we've actually got one of our webcasts, I think it was one of our first webcasts we did in this 6-part series, that was just on the metrics, that you can have a metrics-driven business. And part of it was on how do you measure salespeople, how do you measure technicians. And some of it went back to compensation. It wasn't exactly like, do I have the right compensation for those people? But it was to figure out, what are they doing? So, for example, you might actually see, is your sales team with a metric? You might figure, are they good at adding new customers, but they're terrible at adding on existing or new services to an existing customer? And seeing with those metrics, if you know that the compensation structure is one where you should be seeing, let's say, an even distribution of both of those types of sales behaviors, but you're not actually seeing that in reality when you look at the metrics, then at least you know the compensation might not be off, but then you can figure out what else is wrong. Or if you think that you've got it compensated in a way where, one, just sticking with that example of, the new customer versus adding on to the existing customer, if you think you've got it set up where you're trying to more so compensate them for adding on to an existing customer, more so than a new one, but they're still, your drive, the behavior that you see is the metrics show they're getting more new customers. You've got to figure out what's wrong there. So you always want to use metrics to try and test, measure, and improve the business model that you're putting in place here. So as you do this, I want to kind of start by looking at this from two perspectives. I only have actually 3 slides here. It's a really, really simple conversation today, more than anything. One's on sales and one's on technicians. So I just want to kind of focus there. And I'd love to get your feedback, love to get your questions, and let's add those in here as much as we can. So the first one here is, measuring sales. I've got the graphic there on the right of a carrot stick, in front of somebody, because salespeople tend to work that way very well. A good salesperson, I just have a boss that I said the best salespeople are the ones that are stretched financially because they're motivated financially. If they're overstretched where they've got a really fancy car and a big house or whatever, he loves those kinds of people because they were the ones that needed to make sure they made the payment for that Lexus and that 5-bedroom house or whatever it is that they have. So so that's kind of, you want to think about it from that perspective. And what's interesting here is, as we've talked before, I think this actually doesn't exactly come as a surprise now that you've heard me kind of open this whole thing about your legacy and all that, but the compensation for sales shouldn't just be driven based on sales as well. I think what you've really got to figure out first off is stepping back and looking at what the goals are, what you're trying to do with your company itself. It goes back to the legacy, but you're thinking about what is the goal here. The goal might be, and these goals might change over time. Like today, it might be we just want to get a large number of customers, because I'll give you an example. Some of you might have a very simple set of services. Let's say it's just basic remote monitoring and management, where you've got that and some security and maybe some kind of management of specific high-end applications, or something that's cloud-based applications, whatever the case is. And so you might say, right now what we're trying to do is get more customers onto this base set of services because that's all I want us to offer today. And then tomorrow, meaning sometime in the future, tomorrow the focus is going to be on, we'll add more services. So you look at the company goals and you can figure that you see at the same time the company goals change, let's say 6 months from now or a year from now, where now it's about adding on additional services. But at the same time, you want to think about some of these other higher level legacy type goals of better service, customer satisfaction, and so on. And I remember one time, just as for my own life personally, I remember having some air conditioning work done, and this guy talked us into getting a bigger set of duct work for one specific air duct. I mean, just a small little fix. It was something, and basically we figured out that there was no reason for us having this massive air duct for this little tiny event, and it was probably because he got compensated more on how big the sale was as opposed to what I actually needed. You know, and that's what I felt that way. I don't use that company anymore. I might be wrong, but it really felt right the way I'm thinking about it, so I don't want to use that company anymore. So I use somebody else entirely that I know won't screw me over. So you have to kind of put this all together. So there's a mix here. It's not just a very simple answer. It's going to require you looking at this from a couple of different perspectives. The first one is that perspective of balancing out old and new customers. I already gave you one example. Right now, we're just trying to get a whole bunch of new customers into the mold, so we suddenly have, we're going from 6 customers to 12 to 20 to 100 to whatever the number is. And then maybe 6 months from now, a year from now, you change and you add more services to get into those customers. That's actually a pretty good strategy. Nothing wrong with that. But some of you might also want to do something where you're trying to keep your sales reps. The bad part of that strategy, by the way, is if all your reps are doing is focusing on new customers, no one's ever going back to the old customer to see how they're doing, show them that you care, building the relationship. We've got one of our sessions was on having non-technical customer meetings. And it's about going back and reviewing what you've done, demonstrating your value, and what you should be covering to demonstrate that value, and then having the opportunity to say to the customer, we'd like to add on these additional services because it shows that you care, it shows that you understand what's going on in their environment, and it gives the customer an opportunity to kind of give you some feedback on things that they're concerned about. And so you can't just have just new customers. So it's not a bad business model from a growth standpoint, the example I gave of let's add a whole bunch of customers on, and then we'll add more services. But that's a short-term kind of, type of model. It's not something you can do over years. You're going to end up losing the original customers because you never focused on them. So you got to have that balance there. And then this one's a little different. I haven't talked about this yet, but extending existing services versus adding new services within a customer. It's a very similar kind of conversation to old and new customers, but here we're talking about, let's say that you've got RMM running and you've got it on all the workstations and, half the servers or something. Maybe you need to expand that and get it to be all the servers, and you want to be focused there. If that's what you need as an organization, then you're trying to come up with a compensation model that drives that behavior versus do we want to add new services? We've got this new ransomware protection service where you've got a couple of different layers of endpoint protection, and then you've got maybe email scanning, you've got antivirus, anti-malware, all those kinds of things, and we'll put those on the given endpoints, whether they're workstations or servers, and that'd be an added service. And so you've got to figure out the balance there as well. And then the last one here is really kind of thinking about what's best for your customers. And I want you to generalize in your head all of those customers and what is best for them. What is it that they need? And the reason why I say it that way, for some of you are going, what do you mean? They're just customers. I go, and this one has 5 machines, and that one's got 10 machines. It doesn't really matter. But there are some of you in this audience where you're trying to focus on a very specific demographic. Like some of you, I've actually talked to some of you on some of our other webcasts where your focus is, let's say, just lawyers' offices, because you know that they work a very specific way. They have certain kinds of issues that they have to deal with, making sure they have retention, archiving of data, those kinds of services. Really, you're concerned about that. So you have to figure out what's best for that kind of customer versus your own business, because of that balance where sometimes, as I know you guys kind of know this, just kind of talking out loud here a little bit, but you know that in some cases you have to make a sacrifice and just figure out what's best for the customer and do that alone. So you're trying to balance all of these things together in a way that creates a compensation structure for your salespeople. And now this should be tactically will come into play where now you're going to figure out how do I compensate them. Now there are tons of ways to do that. You can compensate them with just simple, a flat kind of a bonus when someone gets signed up. You can do it based off of purely commission, which makes a lot of sense for most people. But really, this is about more so not so much how you specifically, what is the financial method by which you compensate them, but more so where are you placing that compensation. That's really where I think the focus is here. And then the last part of this for sales is figuring out the metrics that match that compensation model. That's what your goal is. You want to figure out, how can I measure, are they doing the thing that I asked them to do or not? So these metrics could be, and I mentioned some of these things earlier, but it could be things like average order value. You could be looking at the number of new customers per month, per week, per quarter, whatever the time frame is. And you think about it from all those ways, and you start measuring, but they're measured based on what is the behavior you want to drive, and then you start looking for that. I hope that kind of makes sense to you guys here. And then the next one here is to think about technicians, because technicians are a little different. And some of you might even think of technicians are very simple to compensate. You just give them a salary and that's it. But that's, I think, is the wrong way to do it, because of the fact that your technicians often spend, if not always spend, a lot more time at the customer's location than your sales reps ever do. So if anyone represents the face of your business, it's the technician, excuse me. And so and from that regard, you want to figure out how do you make sure that those guys that have this greatest level of impact possible with your customers, how do I compensate them in a way that also goes in that same direction back to what's my legacy? What do I want the customers to walk away with? Because you want the technicians to act in the same way, not just fix the problems, but fix the problems in a way that leaves behind that legacy that you want to build. So for some of you also, your technicians also act as a salesperson. So that means they're obviously looking for new ways to sell, and you have an ability to have them try and provide a new service. But if there's no financial motivation for them to do something, why in the world would they bother suggesting to a customer? I mean, they might do it obviously out of the kindness of their heart, because IT guys, if you're one of the people that does the work yourself, you know very well that if you just want to solve problems, that's why you do this. And if the customer has a problem, you do recommend it no matter what, even if it benefits you or not. And so, but at the same time, if you really want to get a technician working along that same way, you want to think about what you're doing in terms of compensating sales and figure out a very similar model for your technicians. And then that way, what you're doing is in the same way that you're doing with sales. Again, you're thinking about the behavior, and you're working backwards. As a matter of fact, I guess, let me ask you guys in the audience, if you just put something in the Q&A box, there's a fair number of you guys here. I hope I get an answer or two out of you guys. But what is it that you're trying to drive people towards? Are you trying to drive towards, is it new sales? Is it adding existing services into a customer? And, do you even have an idea what your legacy is? I mean, any of that, just pop something in the Q&A box just as a comment. I'd just like to hear some of that back from you guys. And if nobody wants to, that's okay too. I don't mind if you just want to listen today, and that's fine. But I just thought I'd ask just to see where your head is, and put that in the Q&A box, not necessarily in the chat, but in the actual Q&A, and stick that back this way. And that way I can kind of see where your head is. But with the technicians, I think in a lot of ways, here we go. Actually, you guys have something. So Daniel mentions client satisfaction. Okay, I'm going to start there for a second. For client satisfaction, the salesperson, that's a really high-level discussion, isn't it? Because they didn't do a whole lot to make the customer satisfied. It's more the technician. So the technician really has a greater impact on that legacy of client satisfaction being the focus of the behavior that they want to drive. And how do you do that? How do you measure that? It might take some conversation with some of even your customers to figure out what does it even look like. What do they define as satisfaction in order to work backwards to figure out how do you compensate them to get there. It might be that you're going to have net promoter scores, which is one way of doing it. If you've never done a net promoter score, go look that up. That's an easy way to kind of calculate out whether a customer actually is satisfied, whether they'd recommend you to somebody else, that kind of thing. Mark mentions new accounts for sales, customer satisfaction from engineers. So that's actually something that kind of aligns with where Daniel's at, I think, a little bit. So new accounts for sales, that's the focus there. So I like that model. Mark, and for you guys, when you think about what I was saying earlier, where you can't just leave the old customers behind, Mark's model seems kind of very, very high level, very strategic. Get the sales reps to actually get the new customers in, and then it's the technician's job to make sure that the customers remain happy. And, so that might mean that the technician themselves has to be a salesperson for the existing accounts, and the salespeople, their job is just to purely focus on new customers. It depends. There isn't one answer, and there's no way I can give you one answer. I can't just say, just pay everybody this way, and just make it blue. If you make it blue, your life will be great. I can't tell you what color to make it, if that was sort of the analogy I was to use here, because everybody needs something slightly different. Mike says, I pay my techs a certain amount billable, a certain amount non-billable, with the hope that they will look for more billable work and not sit stagnant. So he's trying to make sure that they've got a bit of compensation for both things, where they are doing work that they get paid for and work they're not. And I like that because the non-billable aspect of it actually helps drive customer satisfaction because you're saying, you know what, just make them happy. So if there's something wrong that we can do for them and you can fix it, and even if we're not billing for it or it's not in our SLA or whatever it is, let's go do it anyways. So I like that model. So Mike, Mike has got a great idea there as well. I've got kind of 4 ways you can think about also compensating technicians, and these are sort of one of them we've already talked about a little bit, but these are 4 ways that aren't necessarily even. I think it's 3 of them aren't even really based on it. They're non-billable type of compensation models. But one is teamwork. So one of the metrics you could use with teamwork is to look at tech utilization, and then to figure out whether or not all your techs, if you have multiple techs, if they're evenly distributed. If you certainly have an even distribution of techs from a standpoint of probably the work that you're divvying out. Each one has X number of clients to deal with, or a certain number of endpoints that they have to manage, or whatever it is, right? Some along those lines. So at least in your intent, it's that way. But then you look at things like maybe tickets per week, number of tickets closed per week, maybe revenue they've generated, billable hours, or something like that, where you're looking at, again, you're tying it back to metrics to figure out whether or not your technicians are being compensated and are behaving. That's really kind of what we're looking at here. Are they being compensated and behaving the proper way? Then there's the issue of revenue upsell. So back to Mark's example of sort of new accounts for sales and customer sat from the engineers, revenue upsell might be a way to look at that, because that's not exactly customer satisfaction, which is actually the next one, but I'll skip that one because I've already kind of dealt with it. But with revenue upsell, it might be looking at the technician to say, how much revenue have you generated from the customer? But you probably have to tie that in with customer satisfaction, because you don't want them just trying to talk the customer into getting the bigger AC ductwork for the tiny little vent that you didn't need in your kitchen. To use my own personal analogy again, right? So you don't want it just to be that they just purely get additional revenue, they upsold the customer to something else. You probably need to tie that with customer satisfaction, or at very least have revenue upsell and then use customer satisfaction as a metric, so something like the Net Promoter Score, to make sure that the customer is actually happy. And then the last one I'm thinking of here is just personal development. And in this case, this might be more of what they go and do on their own to make themselves better. We all know that there are a ton of new technologies every day. There are new threats coming out all the time, new ways to try and, if you're worried about external threats, insider threats, if you're worried about ransomware, there are new virtualization technologies, new ways to actually even just utilizing the cloud for just about damn near everything. There's just about everything as a service. How could you as a business try to leverage any of that, try to take advantage of any of that to provide better service for your customers? There could be an aspect of this where there's personal development, and that could be where they did something that got them education credits, where they went to some webinars, maybe they went and get an extra certification, maybe they're just simply doing a bunch of research and coming back and reporting to you on, here's some of the trends that are going on and the things that I think that we could add to our customers' list of services, something that augments what it is that you offer to make your customers more happy, feel more secure, feel like you're a thought leader and you're actually helping them as a virtual CIO or a business partner or strategic advisor, however you like to kind of frame yourself with your customers. But there's that other aspect here, and so there's a couple ways here when you think about this from a compensation standpoint. This is more about more measuring them, I think, than anything. You could compensate them with things like personal development. I know that when I had techs working for me, if I was to go pay for a certification or a class or even just a test, something that they just take off the burden from them, that was always appreciated. So you could look at personal development even as also a compensation method and not just a metric. But teamwork, revenue upsell, customer sat, those are probably more things where you're going to be using them as metrics to figure out how are they behaving? Are they getting all the work done? Are they helping the other techs? Are they taking care of their own load? And if so, that's the behavior you want. Are they upselling revenue? Again, back to the example of they're the ones that are the face of your company most of the time. Are the customers happy with their work, and are they developing themselves? So that's kind of the idea here, I think, more than anything. And so it actually looks like I'm a little short today, which is fine. If you guys have any questions, put those in the Q&A box. But I'm just kind of sum this up. And if you're thinking about anything here, if there was something you were hoping to kind of get to more so, oh, actually, I see here there's another one that came in from the chat here. Another focus that Tyler had: moving existing customers from break-fix to MSP model, new customer acquisition, and increased client satisfaction across all levels. Getting them from break-fix to MSP model is it definitely can be a challenge, especially if they're just used to, I just want to pay you for the hour that you're here, as opposed to, why do I suddenly have to pay you for 10 hours a month? Those kind of things. So, so that's actually not a bad way to do it either. But if you guys have questions, stick those in the Q&A box. And then I'm going to kind of sum this up, and I'll take any questions that you have. I see that a couple are already coming in here. The focus here, high level, is legacy. What is it you want people to, how would you do it? How do you want the customer to feel about it if you did the work yourself? I'm assuming, again, you have more people than just you and your staff. But if you did it, and then you work from that to, what are the behaviors that would leave that legacy? And then from those behaviors, how do I both compensate to get those behaviors, and how am I measuring to see that I am getting those behaviors? And then you adjust the compensation appropriately to get the behaviors. So it's legacy first, and then it's how does that translate into behaviors, and then you figure out what the compensation is and the metrics are. So got a question here. Daniel asks, have you found any types of compensation other than cash to be effective? And the examples you gave were swag, paid time off, etc. Okay, so I always did this. This was something that I love just for working people to keep my employees happy. This is not exactly directly answering your question at all. I'm going on a tangent for a second, but it's okay. I gave every employee their birthday off, and if their birthday was on a weekend, I gave them either the option of Friday or Monday off, because that way it was their day. They felt like we appreciated them. No one should have to come into work on their birthday, not even me. I do. I work. If you're like me and you own your own business, I own 2 of them right now. You're never off any day. In fact, I'm actually doing this webcast from Avignon, France. No joke. I'm on vacation and I'm still doing these, because that's just what happens when you work for yourself. You've got to do some things to make sure that business keeps moving and your customers are happy. Now, back to your question, though. I find that the 2 things work. Certainly, swag, not so much. But things that are either monetary, there's just a couple ways to do this. It's monetary, where you're actually giving them, here's a bonus, that kind of thing, or it's, here's a gift card, go take your husband, wife, significant other out to dinner, those kind of things. But in lieu of that, it might be things that help them excel in to advance, there we go, to advance their own personal development. So back to the example of, like, let me pay for an online certification course. You said you wanted to learn and become, the expert, on VMware. Okay, fine, I'll pay. I found this online course that's reasonably priced. I'll pay for that, but you've got to test, or maybe something like that. Those are great things because people always appreciate that. And then the last I'm thinking of is things like if you send someone, let's say, to a trade show, give them a day off to go see what else is going on in the industry. I always find, like, one of the companies I own is a company called Conversational Geek, and we make books. We're a book publisher. They're free books, kind of like competing with the dummies books that do for B2B that you see at tech shows and things like that. And we always end up giving away one of our tickets that we get to Microsoft Ignite every year, because we have an exhibit booth for that show. And one of the challenges is not actually even getting there. It's more so getting the time off. The fact that their own boss sees the value of investing in sending them to that show. So I think that's it's sort of a couple of different ways you could look at this. Mike says, thanks, Nick. It's the simplest things always help me, and the biggest takeaway I had was my need to return back to setting current goals and working from there. Good. I'm glad, because that's what, like I said, that's my goal in every webcast I do, no matter what the topic is. I just want to get you focused on thinking about the problem. You're going to come up with your own answer. You will. You always will. I'm just trying to keep you focused on how in the world you come up with your answer. So, Tyler asked what benefit packages types are most using, what KPIs are most important. Okay, so good question there. The answer is actually there isn't what most are using. What I've found with a fair number of larger MSPs that are doing very well, they'll focus on the KPIs. They are thinking about some of those metrics I already mentioned, so I'm going to kind of reiterate them. If it's some, actually, let me go and see if I can pull up. I've got some notes on another slide deck that I can actually pull off here, and I can bring this up real quick while we're talking here, because I've got all those. Just don't happen to have them at the top of mind, but I want to get you the answer here. So give me 2 seconds here, and go back to this guy and this guy. That's the wrong one. This guy here. And there we go. All right, so I'm going to go with some of the different KPIs you can do here. So I'm going to do that one. I want to do my revenue metrics here. And that's coming up right here. So some of the bigger ones. So this could be both for sales or for text. You have average deal size. These are some of the KPIs. Revenue per customer. And that can break into things like net new deals, upsell revenue, growth of a specific service, or cross-selling an additional service. I know I'm kind of rattling these off fast. I hope I'm going slow enough you can jot these down and take notes. Those are some of the simple ones that we find that most bigger MSPs are using for KPIs. The smaller ones, it goes down to the tactical stuff, like I mentioned earlier. Ticket volume, it could be daily, weekly, monthly, hours billed, revenue per help desk personnel or technician, tech utilization. Those are some of the KPIs, and those KPIs are the ways that you might look at figuring out how are you doing as a business, and is the compensation model, you think I think I'm paying them to do these things, is that actually working? And so, let's see, Tom says I gave employees a new vehicle as a raise. I get a tax write-off, win-win. Okay, so instead you don't have to drive your own car. You get came back. In this case, he's saying, I gave them a car. They don't have to worry about driving their own car anymore. I mean, you can't lose there. Tyler says we're considering a points-based system linked to KPIs for sales or techs, allows them to customize their benefits package based on their needs, more insurance, covered family members, additional PTO, etc. So that's actually not a bad way either. He's being very flexible. That way, it's kind of a whatever you want. Choose your own adventure here. So I like that as well. And then Herb says, only seeing your question screen, that's the only thing I'm showing. I was just reading off a Word doc that I had from a previous presentation. Apologize, Herb, I didn't want to imply I was going to show something different. I just wanted to go get those metrics. I did say presentation, I think, as I was kind of rattling off, because we did a webinar a couple weeks back on metrics. And that was some of the details. So that's why I mentioned PowerPoint, but I was reading off a Word doc. I apologize there. So type in like my choose your own adventure comment. All right, so it looks like I'm at the end of the questions here. If you guys have any other questions, put them in the Q&A box. I'll be happy to get back with you via email after the webcast, that sort of thing. And I appreciate you guys being on this week. If you liked what you heard today, you like the approach that we're taking here with SolarWinds MSP, there's 4 other webcasts that we've already done. I did them with somebody at SolarWinds MSP who we had a little bit of a back and forth dialogue. They went a little longer. They're 45 minutes or so, I think, each, some along those lines. But if you'd like that, we've got them on a number of other topics that are all, again, the same kind of overarching category of the habits of master service provider businesses. So, and we've got one more next week coming up as well. You guys will see an email invite on that. It's the 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern. So be sure to actually, come and join us with that one as well. Bring your questions there as well. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. And I guess with that, I'm just going to say thank you guys. This is really good. I love the interaction, love the questions, and love the commentary. Come back next week, same time, same bat channel. Do you go that far back? I do, sort of. I watched the old Batman on reruns anyways as a kid. I wasn't available in the 60s run, but I did see that. And we'll catch you on the next webcast. So thanks a lot, you guys, for your attention, and we'll see you next week.